Michael stood in front of his small garage, staring at the cracked sign above the door. The words Michael's Auto Repairs were fading, just like his hope of keeping the shop alive. The building was old, the tools inside were worn out, and his bills kept stacking higher each month. Yet every morning he unlocked that door with the same tired smile, telling himself he would somehow make it through the day. It was late afternoon when a tow truck pulled up. On the back sat a car that looked more like a piece of scrap than a vehicle. The driver jumped down and shouted, "Got a delivery for you, Mike. Some lady wants this thing looked at." Don't know why anyone would bother with it. Michael walked closer and stopped. His eyes traced the lines of the rusty Camaro. The once bright red paint had turned into dull brown patches with streaks of rust crawling up the sides. The tires were flat, the windows cracked, and the engine silent as stone. Most mechanics would laugh and call it hopeless. The tow truck rumbled away, leaving Michael alone with the Camaro. He walked slowly around it, brushing his hand across the hood. Dust covered his fingers. For a moment, he closed his eyes and imagined what the car must have looked like years ago. Shining red paint, polished chrome, an engine that growled with pride. He could almost hear it roaring down an empty highway, the driver smiling with freedom. Opening his eyes, he sighed. The car was a wreck now, but not beyond saving. "We'll get you breathing again," he whispered, as if speaking to an old friend. He pushed the Camaro inside the garage, the wheels squeaking against the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the quiet space. Michael bent down and peered under the hood. The smell of rust and oil hit his nose, but it didn't bother him. He had lived in that smell for years. The garage was dim, lit only by the afternoon sun sneaking through a dirty window. Michael pulled out his tools and set them on the workbench. The clinking sound of metal against metal was oddly comforting. It reminded him that as long as he had tools and an engine, he had purpose. He rolled up his sleeves and leaned into the Camaro, checking wires, bolts, and pipes. Everything was old, worn, or broken. Fixing this car wouldn't just take hours, it might take weeks. He knew he didn't have enough money to order new parts right away. But still, he smiled. This wasn't just another repair job. He could feel it. This car carried something more than rust. It carried history. As Michael worked, his thoughts wandered back to his own father. Years ago, before illness took him, his father used to bring him to the garage every Saturday. They would stand together over an engine, his father's big hands guiding his smaller ones. "Every machine has a heart," his father would say. "It just needs someone to listen." Michael had never forgotten those words. And now, staring at the Camaro, he felt his father's voice echoing inside his head. The hours passed quietly. Outside, the world moved on with noise and rush, but inside the garage, time slowed. It was just Michael in the car, locked in silent conversation. When he finally sat back, his face and arms were smeared with grease, but his eyes shone with determination. "You've been left behind," he whispered to the Camaro. "But I won't let that be the end of your story." Just as he was about to close the garage for the night, Michael heard a soft knock. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the door. A woman stood outside. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a light jacket, but there was something graceful about her presence. Her brown hair was tied back and her eyes carried a mix of strength and sadness. "Are you the mechanic?" she asked softly. Michael nodded. "That's me. You the owner of the Camaro?" She stepped inside, her gaze landing on the car. For a moment, her face softened, almost as if she were seeing an old friend. She walked closer and brushed her fingers across the dusty hood. "Yes," she said after a pause. "It belonged to my father. He bought it when I was a little girl. It was his pride, but after he passed away, it sat in storage. I didn't have the heart to get rid of it." Michael watched her quietly. There was pain in her voice, but also love. He understood that feeling all too well. "I'll do my best," he said firmly. "It won't be easy, but she still has life left in her." The woman looked at him with a faint smile. "Thank you. That's all I wanted, to know she's not forgotten." She didn't introduce herself, and Michael didn't ask. To him, she wasn't a customer with money. She was just a daughter holding on to her father's memory. After she left, Michael stood alone again, staring at the Camaro. He had fixed many cars before, but this one felt different. He didn't know who the woman really was. He didn't know she carried a life of wealth and privilege, tired of people chasing her for her fortune. All he knew was that her heart was tied to this car, and somehow fixing it felt like fixing a part of her too. That night, long after the town had gone quiet, Michael stayed in the garage. The only sounds were the ticking of tools, the hum of a small lamp, and his steady breathing. Every bolt he turned, every wire he touched, felt like a step toward something greater. He wasn't just repairing metal, he was honoring a memory, giving life back to a story that deserved to be told. As midnight drew near, Michael leaned against the car and closed his tired eyes. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll bring you back, no matter how long it takes." And in that silent promise, something inside him shifted. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope, not just for the Camaro, but for himself, because sometimes saving something broken can remind you that you're not beyond saving either. The next morning, Michael arrived early at the garage. The sun had barely risen, painting the small town in shades of gold and pink. He unlocked the rusty door and stepped inside, greeted by the quiet presence of the Camaro. The car stood there like a tired soldier waiting to be called back into battle. Michael rolled up his sleeves and prepared for another long day. He worked carefully, checking the wiring, pulling out old spark plugs and examining the engine. Every part seemed to carry years of neglect, but he wasn't discouraged. To him, fixing the Camaro was more than a job. It felt like a calling. As he bent over the hood, he didn't hear the soft footsteps outside. The door opened and the same woman from last evening stepped inside. Michael looked up, slightly surprised. "You're back," he said, brushing grease off his hands. She nodded and gave a small smile. "I wanted to see how things were going." "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Michael replied. "You can stay as long as you want. The Camaro seems to like company." The woman walked slowly toward the car, her fingers tracing the faded paint. Her eyes carried a faraway look, as though she was traveling back to another time. "This car," she whispered. "When I was a little girl, my father used to drive us to the lake every summer. The wind would rush through the windows and he would play his favorite songs. I would sit in the back seat watching the trees fly past, thinking life would always stay that way." Her voice trembled, but she quickly looked down, trying to hide it. Michael stood quietly, respecting her silence. He knew grief when he saw it. Sometimes words weren't needed, just someone willing to listen. After a moment, Michael asked gently, "So what's your name?" "I didn't catch it yesterday." She looked at him, hesitated, then answered softly, "Sarah." Michael nodded. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." "I'm Michael, but I guess you already know that from the sign." A small laugh escaped her lips, breaking the heaviness in the room. "Yes, I figured," Michael smiled. It wasn't often that laughter filled his garage. Usually it was just the sound of engines and tools. Sarah's presence felt different, almost like sunlight entering a place long covered in shadow. "So," Michael said, leaning against his workbench, "why bring it here?" "There are bigger shops in the city. Places with more tools, more workers." Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. "Because they see cars as money. I think you see them as something more." Her words struck him like a gentle truth. He didn't reply right away, but deep down he felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. As days passed, their conversations grew deeper. Sarah began visiting the garage almost every day after that. Sometimes she brought coffee in a paper cup, other times a small bag of sandwiches. "You don't have to," Michael would say, embarrassed by her kindness. "I know," she replied with a shrug. "But you look like someone who forgets to eat when he's busy." She wasn't wrong. Michael often lost himself in work, skipping meals just to finish a task. Her thoughtfulness touched him more than he could admit. And while he worked, Sarah often sat nearby, watching quietly. Sometimes she asked questions about engines and tools. Other times she shared small stories about her father and how much he loved this Camaro. For Michael, her visits became the highlight of his day. The garage no longer felt so empty. One evening, after Sarah left, Michael sat at his desk staring at the pile of bills. His hand shook as he opened another letter. Past due, electricity, rent, supplies. His chest tightened and he buried the papers under a stack of manuals. He didn't want Sarah to see them. He didn't want her to know how close he was to losing everything. The next morning, Sarah arrived earlier than usual. She noticed Michael's tired eyes and asked softly, "Rough night?" "Just a little," he said, forcing a smile. "Nothing the Camaro and I can't handle." She studied him for a moment, clearly sensing there was more he wasn't saying. but she didn't push. Instead, she handed him a warm cup of coffee and said, "Then let's handle it together." Something in her words warmed him more than the drink. Sarah asked about his life, his childhood, his love for cars. Michael told her how his father taught him everything he knew, how he had opened this garage with nothing but second-hand tools and stubborn hope. "And now?" Sarah asked one evening, her eyes gentle. Michael sighed. "Now it feels like I'm running on fumes. But I can't quit. This garage is all I have left of him." Sarah nodded, understanding more than she let on. She too carried the weight of a father's memory, though hers was wrapped in wealth and expectations. But she didn't tell Michael that. Not yet. Every night, when Michael closed the garage, he would glance at the Camaro one last time. It stood silently under the lamp, its rust and dents still visible, but somehow it already looked different. Maybe it was because Sarah had filled the space with her presence, or maybe because Michael was pouring not just effort but heart into its repair. Either way, the Camaro was no longer just an old car. It was becoming the bridge between two people from very different worlds. Michael didn't know Sarah's full story. He didn't know about her hidden wealth, her loneliness, or her search for something genuine. All he knew was that she cared for this car, and in caring for it, she had stepped into his life in a way he hadn't expected. And Sarah? She didn't know if Michael could ever understand the weight she carried. But when she saw the way he treated the Camaro, not as junk but as something precious, she began to wonder if maybe he could treat her the same way, not as a billionaire's daughter, but as a woman simply searching for someone real. One evening, after another long day of repairs, Sarah lingered by the door. The sun was setting, casting soft orange light across the garage. "Michael," she said quietly, "thank you for not laughing when you saw the Camaro. Everyone else told me it wasn't worth saving." Michael looked up from his tools, his voice steady. "Some things are never about worth. Some things are about meaning." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the silence between them spoke louder than words. Sarah smiled softly and walked out into the fading light, her heart carrying a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Michael watched her go, a strange feeling stirring inside him. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew this. Fixing the Camaro was no longer just about the car. It was about something bigger, something that had already begun to change both their lives. The days began to blur into one another. Every morning, Michael unlocked the garage before the sun rose, and every night he stayed long after the streets outside had gone quiet. The rusty Camaro had become the center of his world. The car was stubborn, the bolts were stiff, the wiring fragile, and the engine coughed whenever he tried to turn it over. But Michael did not give up. He treated every small progress like a victory. If a wire carried current, if a bolt loosened without breaking, he allowed himself a quiet smile. And almost every evening Sarah appeared. At first, Michael thought she only came to check on the Camaro. But soon he noticed she stayed even when nothing happened, just sitting on an old stool, holding a paper cup of coffee, and watching him work. "You don't have to stay," he told her one night as he tightened a rusty pipe. "I know," she said, sipping quietly, "but I like being here." Michael didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say to that. He wasn't used to company, not in his world of grease and silence. Yet he found that her presence didn't distract him. Instead, it kept him steady, like a soft light in a dim room. Their conversation started small. Sarah asked about the tools, about why certain wires needed replacing, about how engines worked. Michael explained in simple terms, his hands moving with calm confidence as he spoke. "So the engine is like a heart?" Sarah asked one evening. "Exactly," Michael replied, his face lighting up. "If the heart doesn't beat, the car can't live." Sarah smiled. "That's what you're doing then. You're giving it life again." Michael paused at her words. Nobody had ever described his work that way before. For most people, cars were just machines. For him, they were more, but he rarely said it out loud. Hearing Sarah say it made something stir in his chest. Over time, the conversations grew deeper. Sarah told him more about her father, the man who had loved the Camaro more than any business deal or fancy party. She described how he would polish the car every weekend, humming songs from his youth, proud of every shine on the chrome. Michael listened quietly. He could picture it in his mind, the bond between a father and his car, the bond between a father and his daughter. It reminded him of his own memories, standing beside his father in their old garage, hands black with oil, but hearts full of joy. One night, the sky opened up and rain poured over the small town. The roof of the garage rattled as water drummed against the metal. Michael was deep under the hood trying to fix the starter when Sarah walked in, shaking the rain off her jacket. "You came in this weather?" Michael asked, raising his head. She laughed lightly. "I couldn't let the Camaro be lonely in the storm." Michael chuckled, then returned to his work. The storm outside made the garage feel even smaller, warmer. Sarah sat near the workbench, her hands folded around a cup of tea she had brought for both of them. For a while, they listened to the rain together, the sound filling the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, it was the kind that felt safe. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you ever get lonely here?" Michael tightened the last bolt before answering. "Sometimes, but cars don't let me feel it too much. They keep me busy." Sarah tilted her head. "But busy isn't the same as happy." Michael looked at her, her words hitting deeper than he expected. He didn't reply, but she didn't push him either. In the following days, Sarah noticed the shadows under Michael's eyes. He worked too late, ate too little, and carried a weight she couldn't name. One evening, when he thought she wasn't looking, she saw him staring at a stack of envelopes with a troubled expression. When he noticed her glance, he quickly pushed them aside. "You're always here," she said softly. "Always working. Do you ever rest?" Michael shrugged. "The Camaro won't fix itself." "But you need fixing too," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Her words caught him off guard. No one had spoken to him like that in years. He wanted to tell her about the bills, about the sleepless nights, about the fear of losing his father's garage. But pride held his tongue. Instead, he just gave her a tired smile. "I'll be fine." Sarah didn't argue. She simply stayed, sipping her coffee, letting her presence say what words could not, that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Weeks passed, and slowly the Camaro began to show signs of life. The engine no longer sat in silence. It coughed, then sputtered as if trying to remember how to breathe. The headlights flickered weakly when Michael tested the wiring. The first time the engine gave a small growl, Sarah gasped in delight. "Did you hear that?" Michael grinned, sweat on his forehead. "Yeah, she's waking up." Sarah clapped her hands like a child, her laughter echoing through the garage. Michael couldn't help but laugh too. It was rare for him to feel that kind of joy, and he realized it wasn't just about the car. It was about sharing the moment with her. Late one evening, after hours of work, Michael leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Sarah sat beside him on the floor, sipping the last of her coffee. The garage was quiet except for the ticking of the cooling engine. "You know," Sarah said softly, "I didn't expect this." "Expect what?" Michael asked. "This place, these nights, you. I thought I was just bringing a car to be fixed. But somehow, it feels like more than that." Michael looked at her, unsure of what to say. Her words carried a weight he felt too, though he didn't dare admit it. Instead, he simply nodded. "Yeah, feels that way to me too." For a long moment they sat in silence, side by side. The Camaro stood before them, still rusty, still imperfect, but alive in its own way. And in that imperfect garage, something unspoken grew between them, something fragile, yet strong. Neither of them said the word, but both of them knew. This was no longer just about a car. When Sarah left that night, Michael watched her go with a feeling he couldn't explain. She had walked into his life quietly, like a soft breeze, but now her presence filled every corner of it. As he closed the garage doors, he glanced back at the Camaro. The car seemed different now, not just because of the repairs, but because it had become the bridge between two lonely hearts. Michael whispered to the car, "We're getting closer, old friend. Closer to your second life. And maybe mine too." And as the lights went out, the promise of tomorrow felt brighter than it had in years. The Camaro was slowly waking up, but Michael's life outside the garage was falling apart. Every evening after Sarah left, he sat at his desk staring at a mountain of unpaid bills. The numbers never stopped growing: rent, electricity, tool repairs, and bank notices that threatened to close everything he had worked for. He pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to calm the pounding in his head. The garage wasn't just a business. It was the last piece of his father, the dream they had shared together. Losing it would mean losing that connection forever. But whenever Sarah walked through the garage doors with her gentle smile, Michael pushed all of that pain behind his own smile. He never wanted her to see how close he was to breaking. One afternoon, Sarah arrived earlier than usual, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Michael was lying on a creeper board under the Camaro, tightening bolts when she walked in. "You work too hard," she said, kneeling down to pass him a cup. Michael rolled out from under the car and took it, his face streaked with grease. "Cars don't fix themselves," he joked lightly. Sarah studied him for a moment. His eyes looked tired, his shoulders heavy. "You're always joking," she said softly. "But I can see you're exhausted." Michael forced a grin. That's just part of the job. He didn't want her to see the truth, that his exhaustion wasn't only from work, but from the weight of debt and fear pressing down on him. Later that evening, while Michael was busy in the back of the garage, Sarah's eyes wandered across the desk near the wall. She noticed the pile of letters tucked halfway under a manual. Curiosity tugged at her, and before she could stop herself, she gently pulled one out. Her heart tightened as she read the bold words, "Final Notice." Before she could read further, Michael returned and quickly snatched the letter from her hand. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Those aren't your concern, Michael," Sarah began, her voice full of worry. "You're in trouble, aren't you?" He turned away, hiding his face. "It's nothing I can't handle, but you don't have to handle it alone," she said gently. Michael closed his eyes. For a moment he wanted to tell her everything. The fear of losing the garage, the sleepless nights, the feeling of failing his father. But pride held him back. He had always carried his burdens alone, and it felt wrong to place them on her shoulders, so he only shook his head. "You don't understand. This garage is all I have." "I can't let it go." Sarah stepped closer, her voice soft. "Then let me help you." But Michael didn't answer. He kept his eyes fixed on the Camaro as if the car could save him from admitting the truth. Memories of his father. That night, long after Sarah had left, Michael sat alone in the garage. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and the only light came from a single lamp over the Camaro. He leaned against the hood, whispering as though speaking to his father. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Dad, but I promised you I'd never give up. I just don't know if I'm strong enough anymore." The silence answered him, but in that silence he remembered his father's words. "Every machine has a heart, and so do you. Don't forget that." Michael closed his eyes, letting the memory steady him. Even if the world tried to break him, he couldn't let the Camaro or Sarah down. Sarah's worry the next day. Sarah returned with a bag of food. She placed it on the workbench and crossed her arms. "You haven't eaten properly in days," she said firmly. Michael chuckled weakly. "You sound like a doctor." "I sound like someone who cares," Sarah corrected, her eyes softening. "Michael, you're carrying too much. Why won't you trust me?" Michael's hands froze over the engine. He wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck in his throat. Trust was hard when life had only ever taught him to depend on himself. So instead he said quietly, "Because if I fall, I don't want to drag anyone else down with me." Sarah's heart ached at his words. She wished she could tell him who she truly was, that she had the power to clear his debts in a heartbeat. But she held back. She wanted him to see her as Sarah, not as someone with endless money. Still, she made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't let him face this storm alone. Despite the struggles, progress on the Camaro continued. The new starter worked, the fuel lines began to respond, and the headlights shone brighter with each passing day. One evening, when the engine coughed louder than before, Sarah clapped her hands with joy. "She's almost alive." Michael laughed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Almost. Just a little more patience." Sarah smiled at him, but her thoughts were heavy. She knew patience wouldn't fix Michael's troubles. Still, she admired his spirit. He fought every day, not just for the car, but for his dignity, for his dream. And the more she saw that, the more her heart leaned toward him. Late one night, Michael sat on the floor of the garage, his back against the wall, his face buried in his hands. The bills lay scattered around him, and the weight of failure pressed harder than ever. He didn't hear the door open until Sarah's gentle voice broke the silence. "Michael?" He looked up, startled, trying to hide the papers. But it was too late. She had seen them. She walked over and knelt beside him. "You don't have to pretend anymore." Michael's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he let the mask slip. I'm losing everything, Sarah. No matter how hard I work, it's never enough. I don't know how much longer I can fight. Tears filled her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. Then let me fight with you. Michael shook his head. Why would you? You don't owe me anything. Sarah reached out, placing her hand gently over his. Because sometimes people are sent into our lives not to owe us anything, but to stand beside us when we can't stand alone. For a moment, Michael just stared at her, words lost. Nobody had ever said something like that to him before. The storm inside him didn't disappear that night, but something shifted. For the first time, Michael allowed himself to feel that he wasn't completely alone. Sarah didn't offer money. She didn't offer solutions. She simply stayed, her quiet presence stronger than any promise. As they sat side by side on the cold garage floor, the Camaro stood before them, a symbol of resilience, of battles fought, of lives slowly being repaired. And though neither spoke it out loud, both felt it in their hearts. This was no longer just about fixing a car. It was about fixing each other. Weeks of hard work had brought the Camaro closer to life, and the day had finally come when Michael felt it was ready for a proper test. He had been working from sunrise to sunset, patching wires, replacing worn parts, and tuning the engine. Every step had been careful, almost like handling something fragile yet alive. Sarah arrived early that morning, her eyes shining with excitement. She stepped into the garage quietly, careful not to disturb Michael as he made the final adjustments under the hood. "Morning," she said softly. Michael looked up and smiled, grease smeared across his hands and forehead. "Morning. I think she's ready for her first real drive." Sarah's eyes widened. "Really?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, the engine runs smoother than it has in years. The brakes are solid. It's ready to roll." Michael wiped his hands and stepped back from the car. "But test drives are always tricky," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Sometimes a car surprises you. We have to be careful." Sarah nodded. "I trust you." Her words made Michael pause. Trust was a rare thing, and hearing it from her made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. He unlocked the door to the Camaro and helped Sarah in. She sat behind the wheel, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on the steering wheel. For a moment, neither spoke. The garage was silent except for the faint hum of the engine. Michael climbed in beside her. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." With a turn of the key, the engine growled to life. It wasn't perfect yet. The sound was rough, uneven, but it carried a spirit that had been gone for too long. Sarah's face lit up with joy. "She's alive," she exclaimed, laughing with happiness. Michael grinned, feeling a surge of pride. "I told you she just needed a little attention." Slowly, they drove out of the garage onto the empty street. The tires crunched against the gravel and the wind rustled through the open windows. The car didn't just move, it breathed as if awakened from a long sleep. Sarah laughed again, leaning back in her seat. "I can't believe it. I haven't felt this excited in years." Michael glanced at her, noticing the way her eyes sparkled in the morning light. Something about seeing her happy made all the sleepless nights, the worry, and the struggle feel worth it. As they drove through the quiet streets of town, their conversation flowed easily. Sarah talked about her childhood, the summers spent by the lake, and how her father had loved this car more than anything. Michael listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking questions. He told stories of his own life, too, of his father teaching him how to fix engines, of growing up with dreams bigger than his means, of opening the garage and fighting to keep it alive. For a while, the world outside the car disappeared. It was just the two of them, the hum of the engine and the soft rustle of the wind. "You know," Sarah said softly, "this car isn't just metal to me. It's memories, it's my father." Michael nodded. "I understand. Some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth saving no matter what." Her gaze met his, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding, a shared respect, a hint of something deeper. The streets were clear, so Michael suggested they take the Camaro to the edge of town, where the road opened into a long stretch of asphalt with fields on either side. "This is where we'll see what she can really do," he said. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. "I trust you," she repeated. Michael smiled. "Good. Then let's take it slow. We're not rushing." He guided her through each shift, explaining how the engine responded, how the tires gripped the road, how the brakes would behave. Slowly, carefully, they built confidence in the Camaro together. And in that process, Michael noticed a change in Sarah. She sat straighter, her hands steady, her smile brighter. She wasn't just testing the car, she was testing herself, and he felt honored to be beside her. At one point, the engine purred smoothly, the Camaro gliding effortlessly along the road. Sarah laughed again, a sound that echoed across the fields. "Michael, I can't believe it. She's perfect." Michael laughed too, his heart light for the first time in weeks. "Not perfect, but she's alive. That's what matters." Sarah's eyes softened. "And it's thanks to you?" Michael shrugged, trying to hide his pride, but he felt warmth spread through him. For so long he had struggled alone. Now, seeing the car alive and seeing Sarah so happy, he realized that sometimes help comes in unexpected ways. And sometimes, the person who helps isn't just fixing machines, they're fixing hearts too. After a while, they slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road. The sun was dipping low, casting long golden shadows across the fields. The Camaro sat silently, its engine ticking softly as it cooled. Sarah turned to Michael, her voice quiet. "I didn't just bring the car here to fix it. I think I was hoping to find something real. Someone real." Michael's breath caught. He looked at her, unsure how to respond. Her words were honest, raw, and carried a weight he had never expected. "I didn't expect to find it in a garage," she continued, "or in a mechanic who works harder than anyone I've ever met. But here you are." Michael swallowed hard. His hands itched to reach out, but he hesitated. He wasn't used to hearing someone speak to him like that. Finally, he said softly, "I didn't expect to find anything real either. Not in a long time, but maybe we're both lucky." For a moment, they just sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The Camaro stood quietly beside them, its work complete for the day, but the work between the two of them had only just begun. As night fell, they drove back to the garage slowly, careful not to push the car too hard. Every shift of the gears, every press of the brakes felt like a rhythm connecting them, not just to the Camaro but to each other. When they reached the garage, Michael turned off the engine. The soft ticking of the cooling metal filled the space. Sarah looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Thank you, Michael. Not just for the car, but for everything." He nodded quietly, a lump in his throat. "Sometimes saving something else can remind you of what matters most," he said. Sarah smiled, understanding perfectly. And as she walked out into the cool evening air, Michael realized that the Camaro had given them both more than just a ride. It had given them trust, respect, and the first quiet sparks of something neither of them had expected, but both were willing to explore. The Camaro had never looked better. Its engine purred smoothly. The paint gleamed faintly after Michael had carefully polished away decades of dust, and even the headlights shone like new. It had been a long journey of hard work, late nights and countless challenges, but the car was finally ready. Michael stepped back, wiping sweat and grease from his hands. He looked at the Camaro with quiet pride. Every scratch, every dent, every stubborn bolt had a story, and now that story was alive again. "Looks perfect," Sarah said softly, stepping beside him. She had stayed to watch the last adjustments, her eyes filled with admiration. Michael smiled at her, a mixture of relief and happiness in his expression. "Almost perfect," he said. "But perfection isn't what matters. Life is about keeping things alive even when they're broken." Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. But today she carried a secret heavier than the Camaro itself, a truth she had been holding back, unsure how Michael would react. They walked together to the street outside the garage. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the pavement. Michael ran his hands over the hood of the Camaro one last time, feeling its smooth lines beneath his fingers. Sarah watched him, her heart pounding. She had come to care for Michael deeply, not just for his skill, but for his honesty, his quiet strength, and the way he saw the world differently from anyone she had ever met. "Michael," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. He turned, curious. "Yes?" She took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you. Something important." Michael's brow furrowed slightly. He could sense the weight in her words. "Okay, what is it?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I'm not just the daughter of the man who owned this Camaro. I'm also the head of his company now. A company worth billions. Michael blinked, surprised. His mind struggled to process the words. All this time he had treated her as just another customer, a woman who cared for her father's memory. He had no idea she was a billionaire, someone who lived in a world completely different from his own. Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her heart. I didn't want to tell you before because I wanted you to see me. Not my money. I wanted you to see me as Sarah, someone who needed something real, not someone chasing wealth. Michael stared at her, his chest tight. For a moment he said nothing, unsure of what to feel. Shock, disbelief, and a strange relief all mingled inside him. Finally he exhaled slowly. So, all this time you're wealthy and I had no idea. Sarah nodded. Yes, but that doesn't change anything I feel. Or what I've come to care about. About you. For several heartbeats neither spoke. The Camaro stood silently beside them, its engine quiet now but carrying the echoes of the work they had done together. Michael finally said, his voice soft, You didn't have to hide it from me, but I think I understand why. You wanted honesty, not expectations. You wanted someone real. Sarah's lips curved into a small, hopeful smile. Yes, exactly. Michael looked at her, his gaze steady. And I don't care about the money. I never have. All I cared about was you. And this. He gestured to the Camaro. And the way you care about things that matter. Sarah's eyes glistened with emotion. She had feared his reaction, worried that the truth would push him away, but instead Michael's words felt like a gentle hand holding hers in reassurance. Michael gestured toward the driver's seat. Do you want to take her out again? One more drive? Sarah's smile widened. I thought you'd never ask. Together they climbed into the Camaro. Michael sat beside her, guiding her through the familiar controls. This time, though, their bond felt stronger than ever, not just because of the car, but because of the trust and respect they had built over weeks of late nights, laughter, struggles, and small victories. When the engine roared to life, it was more than a sound of metal waking up. It was the sound of shared effort, of two hearts beginning to beat in sync. As they drove down the quiet streets, Sarah laughed, leaning back in her seat. I can't believe this is real. You actually brought her back to life, Michael smiled. Not just me. We did it together. That's the thing about fixing something, it's never just the work. It's the care you put in, the patience, the love. Sarah reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then, you put love into this car? She asked softly. Michael's eyes met hers. I put care, and care is close enough to love. Her laugh came again, lighter this time, full of joy and relief. They stopped at a quiet overlook, the town stretching below them in the fading light. The Camaro sat idle, but their hearts were anything but still. Michael, Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. I know we come from very different worlds. You work with your hands, you struggle every day to survive, and I've lived in a world where almost everything is given to me. I was afraid you'd see me differently when you found out. Michael took her hand gently. I don't care about that. The worlds we come from don't matter. What matters is who we are now and how we see each other. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness. I've never met anyone like you. Honest, kind, hardworking, someone who sees what really matters. Michael squeezed her hand. And I've never met anyone like you. Strong, caring, willing to stand beside someone else. Not because you have to, but because you want to. For the first time, both of them felt completely seen, not as a billionaire or a struggling mechanic, but as two people who mattered to each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah leaned closer to Michael. I don't need more money, Michael, she whispered. I need someone real. Someone like you. Michael's heart swelled. He had spent so long struggling, feeling alone in the world. And now the person he had grown to care for more than anything was offering her heart, not her fortune. He reached out and held her hand, feeling the warmth and sincerity in her touch. Then I'm here. Not for money, not for anything else, just for you. They sat together in the quiet of the overlook, the Camaro beside them shining softly in the last light of day. The car had been a bridge, first between Michael and a dream, then between Michael and Sarah, and now between two hearts ready to start something real, the beginning of something real. The Camaro had been restored, but it was more than a car now. It was a symbol of trust, perseverance, and love that had grown in unexpected ways. Michael and Sarah knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges, struggles, and unexpected turns. But they also knew that together they could face anything. Michael started the engine once more, letting it hum beneath them. Sarah smiled, leaning back, feeling safe and happy. "This is perfect," she said quietly. Michael nodded. "It is, not because of the car, but because of this. Us." And as the wind whispered through the open windows, carrying the promise of tomorrow, both of them knew that they had found something far more valuable than money, fame, or success. They had found each other. The Camaro, once rusty and forgotten, now stood as a testament to patience, hard work, and the courage to care. And just like the car, Michael and Sarah were ready to move forward, stronger, wiser, and together.